Ah, for crying out loud, look at this. I had this log place in front of my mill area type place all cleaned up. Now I got this big mess of logs here. Do people even say for crying out loud anymore? Haven't heard that in a long time. I just thought it'd be fun to use it. What's really strange is suddenly the sun's over here instead of over here. It's now overcast instead of blue sky. These logs just nicely arranged themselves in front of the mill, and this big pile of offcuts just disappeared. It's looking like it's going to be a good day, except my truck and trailer suddenly disappeared. Hopefully they'll turn up here somewhere. I've made some videos, or maybe it was only one video or two, about how I choose to make my cuts in the log with the mill. I think it's about time I do that again, especially since I've changed the way I do that. I was going to show you how I make my first cuts and decide where to make the rest of the cuts, but this light overcast day, it's just too sunny and bright. It's hard to see with all the shadows. Hold on a moment while I change the weather real quick. Oh yeah, that's much better. I have weather connections. Although now it's kind of cold, I might have to put my jacket on. Oh yeah, that's better. The way I've commonly made my cuts is to try to maximize as much wood out of the log as I can. I would drop the blade down to where I could get either a 4 or a 6-inch cut out of my first cut. So if I wanted to get a 6-inch board, I would drop it down to where it's 6 inches from corner to corner. That way I would start out as close as I can to the edge and get as much wood out of that first cut and still get the width I need for a clean, usable board. But since I have more wood than I know what to do with, and the price of lumber, at least Douglas fir lumber, dimensional lumber, is down and hardly worth selling, I'm trying to make more quality wood instead of quantity of wood. To do that, I'm starting to do it in the same way a lot of people who mill hardwoods or big timbers do it, by going off the center. To do that, I put the center or the pith of the log at the same level on both sides, the same level from the sawmill bed. On this log, I'm going to try to get mostly 2x8s out of it because it's a good size for 8-inch material. I can get a good strip of 8-inch boards out of this cant, and it has some big knots in it. Usually the bigger the knots are, the bigger the boards I try to get out of it, because bigger knots and bigger boards are less of a weak spot than they are in smaller boards, relative to the size of the boards. If I want 8-inch wide boards, I go up 4 inches from the center. I'll make a cut here and a cut 4 inches below. I've got 8-inch boards here. Now if I go up 2 more inches, and I can make a 2x6 out of this flitch. So I'll make my first cut here, second cut here, flip the log over, then do the same thing on the other side. If I was to start up an inch higher, I'm too high to get another board out of that. There's really no usable wood in here unless I cut a 1/2-inch thick board, but I don't want any 1/2-inch thick boards. For people who cut hardwoods and big timbers, warping and twisting is a big deal, and it's something a lot of hardwoods do a lot more than Douglas fir. So people who do that, they already are mindful of the center, the pith. But the commercial mills who cut Douglas fir, they don't do that. They just try to maximize the amount of wood they can get out of each log. It's just not as important to do with softwoods like Douglas fir, maybe more so with pine. It does help to do it this way, and you do get better boards, but I don't think it helps that much. But a small operation like this where I have a mill and I can take the time on each log to center the pith, and when I have more wood than I know what to do with, and when I'm dealing with dead timber or dying timber, it's usually that outer sapwood that starts deteriorating the most and gets bugs in it. So I've been going more toward going for quality wood instead of trying to maximize every bit of wood like the commercial mills would. Whether it actually makes a difference on Douglas fir, just 2x6s and regular lumber like that, probably minimally, but maybe it's a little bit more fun this way. Here's my 8-inch cant. If I go up 2 more inches, let's see if I can get a 2x6 out of this flitch. Looks like it's going to be too small. It's only 5 inches. I could get a 2x4 out of this, or I could drop it down 1 inch and get a 1x4, then get a 1x6. But this tree was even more dead than the other ones I've been working on recently. It's already getting bugs in that outer sapwood. Instead of making my first cut at 10 inches, I'll drop it down to 9 inches. I'm not even going to bother with getting a 1x4 out of this piece because it's going to have bugs in it. So I'll make my first cut here, second cut here. I'll get a 1x6 out of that flitch. Then I'll be left with my 8-inch cant. Sometimes I get questions in the comments about certain logs and why I started my first cut so low on them. These are some of the types of reasons why I do that sometimes on some logs. A lot of times it seems like it's wasteful because I'm cutting such a big cap cut off of it, but usually it's because there's something in the sapwood, some kind of a defect, or maybe the log has a lot of sweep to it, so I have to go down deep to get a straight board. In this case, it's because it's got bugs in it. And this log has big knots, so to get a 1x4 out of that outer edge where the knots are the biggest, a 1x4 with big knots in it is very low grade wood. Now I have an 8-inch wide cant. Is it even called a cant at this stage? Maybe it's more of a pre-cant. Now I do the same as I did with the original log. I make that center the same height from the bed on both ends. It was 7 inches on the far end, so I set my blade at 7 inches. It's a little bit low, but close. Put a small toe board in there. I know there are better options for toe boards. You can buy toe boards for this mill, or I can set up a jack. But I haven't done it partly because there could be some changes coming for this mill. Since I'm going for 2x material, that means I need to come up 1 inch for my first 2x. That gives me 1 inch above the center, then I go 1 inch below the center. That's going to be my 2x with a heart center. Then from that I go up 2 inches. There's my next 2x. 2 inches from that, I can get 1, 2, 3. I could get a 1x4 out of that, but we got these bug holes in it, so I'm not going to bother. And these big knots, and that 1x4 would catch the brunt of the biggest part of the knots. Make the first cut here. This will all be waste wood, but that's okay because it's not very good wood. These would be big knots for a 1x4 or even a 2x4, but for a 2x8, they're not that big. But the edges of this outer cut have bug holes in it, so we'll treat this board like a flitch and put it in the flitch pile, cut that edge off and make it a 2x6. This will be a lower grade 2x6 because of the big knots. But when you go down a level, we get into some much better wood. Smaller knots, no bug holes. Oh, that's where they went. Since we're going for 2x material, drop the blade down to the best 2-inch multiple, 8 inches. That should give us 4 2x8s. If this was a good fresh green log, I could go up another inch and get a 1x4 out of here, especially since this side has no significant knots. But since we have bugs in this one, we're going to sacrifice all that wood. We'll skip that on this log. Now we have 4 boards with relatively even rings. The rings on this side somewhat match the rings on this side. The ones on this side match the ones on this side. The heart is close to center. This one's a little off. The rings on this side match the rings on this side. So when they dry, there might be a better chance of them drying evenly when the rings are consistent versus a board that might have been offset over here. It has this kind of ring pattern here, a different kind of ring pattern over here. Does it make a difference on Douglas fir? I don't know, maybe. Now there are a lot of people who will say the center, the pith, it's trash, you just throw that away. I think a lot of that comes from different species of wood, especially a lot of hardwoods, maybe more so pine than Douglas fir. I've had some Douglas fir where that middle pith piece will twist, warp, but I've had even more of it that didn't. A lot of people will learn something about one thing and think they need to apply what they learned about that one thing to everything else. But we don't live in that kind of a one-size-fits-all black and white world. Different situations are different. Different types of wood can behave differently than other types of wood. A lot of times if I hear someone say, you always want to blank, or you never want to blank, if I see they're using those kind of absolute statements, I tend to tune out. The next one's a smaller log from a different tree. This one I'm going for 2x6s. We need a 6-inch wide cant. From the center, I'll go up 3 inches. We'll make a cut here, then when I flip it over, we'll do the same thing, 3 inches from center on that side. Then we got a 6-inch wide cant that is heart-centered. Now we'll see if I can get a 2-inch flitch out of it. At 2 inches, there's just not enough wood up here. So we're going to have to go down to a 1-inch flitch. We'll get a 1-inch flitch off of this, then we'll have the beginning of our 6-inch cant. Now there's 6 inches, there's our 6-inch cant. If we go up 2 inches, it's wide enough to get a 2x6 on this side. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but this log has a sag in the middle. It has some sweep to it. I think if we cut in right here, we're going to be getting into the bark when we're in the middle. So instead of getting a 2x out of the flitch, we'll drop down 1 inch and we'll just get a 1x out of the flitch. This is what I'm talking about with the sag in the middle. It started wide on this end, then started getting narrower in the middle. This is barely 6 inches here. If I would have cut 1 inch higher, it would have been too narrow in the middle to get a board out of it. The heart center is about 7 inches above the bed rail. It's off center this way because it was a wonky log and the heart center of the log was off center of the log. That's just how it is, so we'll deal with it that way. With a lot of logs, all you can do is all you can do. We'll set the blade height to 7 inches as a visual guide of where the center of the other end of the log is. Then put a toe board under this end to raise the center of the log to meet the level of the blade. We just set the blade at that height to use it as a visual guide. We're close enough. This isn't rocket science. We're not building a Mars rover here. It doesn't have to be perfect. At 1 inch, that gives us 1 2x6 here. That first one off the center has to be an odd number to make an even number this way. If we were making 1-inch boards, it'd be a 1/2 inch up to make a 1-inch board. Now we do our evens. Up 2 inches, there's another 2-inch board. There's another 2-inch board, but we're running out of log there, so we'll only be able to get a 1-inch board. So a 2-inch board, another 2-inch board, and a 1-inch board. I think this is what Eric, the old jarhead, calls odds and evens. He talks about that a lot on his channel. If I was cutting this the way I used to, where I was maximizing the amount of wood I could get off the edge, I could start out another 1/2 inch higher. But then I'd be off center down here, and I might split the pith, making more unstable boards. If I would start a 1/2 inch higher over here, and if I would have done the same on this cut, I would be able to get 2 more 1x4s out of this log. But by doing this way, I'm getting maybe a little bit better quality lumber and wasting the equivalent of 2 1x4s, if that makes sense. If any of this makes sense. After flipping the cant, we'll lower the blade to the center, heart center, which is a little off. We're 4 inches here, because we'll have a 1x6 here, a 2x6 here, an inch below the blade. And then our next 2x6 will be here, because we want that heart to be close to the middle of the board. That will be the top of that 2x6. If we raise it up 2 inches, that'll be the next 2x6. See if we can get another 2x6. If the log was straight, we could get a 2x6 with some wane in it. But this log is sagging in the middle, so if we cut right here, we're going to get into that sag, and we'll be cutting into bark. At the middle of the log, this height won't be wide enough to get a board. So we're going to have to drop it an inch and get a 1x6 out of here instead of a 2x6 here. This is why I started my cut so low on that end. Even though I started low, I still got some wane in the middle because the log was crooked. That's just the way it is when you're turning squiggles into straight lines. There's going to be more waste that way. Now I have a 6x8 cant. We want to get our 2x6s out of it this way. Dimensionally, there's enough wood here to get 4 2x6s. But if I did that, I'd make a cut here and then a cut here, and I'd be splitting that pith. That's what we're trying to avoid. I have to make a 1x6 here, then drop down 2 inches, make the next cut an inch above the pith, then the next one 2 inches, so it's an inch below the pith. Then I can get another 2x6, and I'll have to have a 1x6. There we have it, boards with some uniformity of grain pattern from one side to the other. The heart is kind of in the middle. Ideally it would be in the middle, but it's a little off. I put less effort into trying to center the heart on curved logs, because even if it is dead center on both ends, in the middle it's going to be somewhere else, because the heart is going to curve like the rest of the log. Like I said earlier, I don't know how much of a difference this makes in Douglas fir in just this kind of small dimension lumber. Clouds are looking like there could be some rain coming. Well, that's it for today. I still have these logs left from that first dump trailer load. On the next one, we can just mill those up and watch the mill go through the wood, kind of like usual. Or if there's anything else you can think of that you want me to demonstrate or explain about what I do, maybe we can demonstrate on those logs. Or if I completely confused you on what I was trying to explain on this one, I maybe could do some splaining on the next one. I've heard it said don't ask your YouTube audience if they have any questions, because that just opens you up to all kinds of things. But I don't think this is a normal audience. I think you all are more reasonable and intelligent. But keep in mind, I'm not necessarily showing you the way to mill lumber, or even necessarily the best way to do it. I'm just showing you the way I've been doing it. If you have any questions or suggestions on what to show with these logs, leave a comment below. See you on the next one.